You may be right. I think that is so interesting. Is it fear or is it pleasure that I'm chasing?
Yeah.
I think you touched on it earlier regarding the importance of knowing what it is that you want. Wow.
Yeah.
That's not easy. That's not easy. But having said that, I think it's a lot more important to focus on that in the beginning, because that becomes your overall guidance in terms of where you want to go, as opposed to often we talk about pushing on a string. In terms of, we put a lot of effort into the various tactics. We're not being very strategic in terms of our approach, and what we should be doing is pushing everything in the right direction, and we could measure our progress in terms of that. The second thought that came to mind while you were talking is that we are terrible judges of progress. We tend to overestimate what we can achieve in the short term, and we tend to underestimate what can be achieved in the long term. So as a result, we feel like we're not making progress because we overestimated what we could do. And in the long term, we didn't realize we could go as far as is possible. Yeah. So I was also reading through that dip in Seth Godin's work. He talks about two things. First of all, often quoted, quitters never win and winners never quit. And you hear this quite often. It's they say Vince Lombardi basically said that. And what's interesting is that he's saying not necessarily. He's saying winners quit regularly. They just quit the right stuff at the right time. And that's very interesting, because it's almost like a sense of when you should stick and when you should quit. And maybe that's quite important.
Totally, Loic. Yeah, I agree. I think it comes down to how did they know when to quit, basically? You're saying at the right time. But how did they know it was the right time? Because they're asking the right questions. They're listening to their intuition. They're looking for the signs outside. They're being present in the moment instead of up in their head, sort of worrying about maybe the future or the past or whatever, as we often do. So that's my take on that. What do you think?
Okay, so what I'd like to say is that going into that slog, seemingly the successful tend to push hard, looking forward to the slog, and kind of the sooner the better, because they know that this is the way, sort of the difficult way, the challenging way. That's probably the way they should take. And so they just go, instead of being hesitant, they rush straight into it. And my sense is that they've got an understanding within themselves of how far they're prepared to go before pulling the plug. And maybe that's the point of knowing when to quit. I wonder, in the field of investing, for example, we apply something called the stop loss. And it's a simple thing, basically. You can either have a fixed point at which you decide to sell the share that you bought, or you can have what they call a trailing stop loss, which is basically as the share moves up in price, hopefully it moves up, the percentage basically stays the same. So let's assume you agreed to yourself to accept a 10% loss. That's part of your strategy. So what you do is that as the share starts climbing, that 10% obviously adjusts with the share. My point being that as you go through the slog, you've kind of told yourself, this is the pace that I want to maintain, or these are the milestones that I want to reach. And if I'm not meeting them, then maybe it's time to quit. As opposed to going into it more or less blind with only an overview of where you want to end up without so much of a plan.
Totally. No, you're right there. That reminds me of sort of what we call about outcome goals and process goals, what you're saying there. Because outcome goals are just focusing on the result, and often it can seem pretty overwhelming and we lose track when we're not there. Whereas if we focus on the process goals, the milestones, as you said, that take us to our ultimate destination, then it's more motivating for us, because we're sort of ticking off each milestone as we go. So it's what you said there definitely reminds me of the need to focus more on process than outcome.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Tell me something. Well, to me, one needs to look at kind of the inevitable. It sounds like the successful look at it as, once they've understood that that's the direction they want to take, then they see it as the inevitable, which is why they push through, They push through. The other thing that came to mind, we spoke earlier this month about having a reverse clause. And the reverse clause basically says that whatever obstacles happen in your life, whatever happens to stand in your way, whether it's a friend that betrays you, whether it's a technical glitch that erases your work, to be prepared, and this is the Stoic mind at work, to be prepared to go back one step, reassess, reevaluate, and decide whether to maybe turn left or right and see it as a possible opportunity. So for example, let's say you have a glitch which erases your work, like a computer glitch. It happens. Maybe your computer crashes and you lose a portion of the work that you were working on. Most likely, I don't know, have you ever had that happen to yourself?
It's just happened to somebody I know well.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so not me, unfortunately, but yes, so I know it well.
So let's say it erases your work, and usually what happens is you can recover from memory pretty well from that. I mean, it's obviously a painful exercise to go and recapture all of that information, but the second time around quite often results in better work, as opposed to quitting.
Yeah.
So you go back one step. So to have that reverse clause, and then obviously start as soon as you can. What other thoughts have you got on this?
Well, no, I like that idea. It sort of reminds me of the sort of driving analogy that we spoke about earlier. Sort of, it's like adjusting your route, really, isn't it? Sort of reversing a bit, and seeing where you could have improved in a way. In coaching, I've seen this before. We talk about sort of raising from the drama level, where we're in the total of, this is a nightmare, why is it happening to me? I'm just a victim. And then moving up to the opportunity level. How could I change perspective, and what could this actually teach me? This sort of event in life, sort of thing. So we can apply this to anything that happens to us, to our language learning journey, to any challenge that we have in life, really. So totally.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. If we were to call it at that for the day, what is the one thought, the one idea that anybody listening could implement today? Like if you had to choose one in your arsenal of tools, what is the one idea that they should implement in order to get clarity for themselves?
Yeah. Knowing what is essential to them. That if I could resume it like that, it's so obviously to know what is essential. Yes. You need to be able to know what your true priorities are, know what your values are, sort of your passion, your purpose. Okay, there's a few things behind that question.
Sure.
But to summarize, know what is essential to you, know what matters,
and then you
that's
measure
your
it.
Guiding light.
Yes, and you measure everything else up against that, huh?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's your compass, as you say.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
what
that
about
sounds
you,
amazing. From my point of view, I follow very similar thinking. I like to believe that you have to start with why. I think why is the most important question, just in general, in terms of what you want. So it's kind of the Socratic method where you ask why a number of times, usually 5. But if you just say why, and everything emanates from there, isn't it? When and where and how and what is it that we're going to undertake in the first place? Well, only once we've figured out why we should do it.
Yeah,
so
totally.
If you can get clarity on the why, quite often it's easier to figure out the others. And then from there, more or less when to stick and when to quit, I think. Yeah,
totally. We're on the same wavelength, Loic.
Okay, sounds good. So I would almost say that kind of wraps up this particular session. I think we should do this more often, actually. It's interesting.
Great.
Let's see how this turns out without visuals, and looking forward to it.
Okay, great to see you.
Good.
Well, great to hear you, Loic, I should say.
And we'll catch up soon.
Okay, no problem.
All righty, you keep well.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye. Well, that's about a wrap. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I sure did. Interesting discussion. Food for thought. So I will catch you again soon. Bye for now.